Today, we're digging into what happens when a promised political comeback runs headfirst into a wall of resistance. We've gone through political analysis, polling data, and legal scholarship to tell a story of immense coming from pretty much all sides. This quote really captures the whole promise of Trump 2.0, right? A forceful return ready to shake everything up. But as our sources suggest, that promise of disruption, well, it's turning out to be a bit of a double-edged sword. And that gets to the heart of the question we're exploring. Behind all the loud promises, is something else going on? The sources we looked at suggest that instead of a fortress being rebuilt, we might be watching one where the foundations are silently crumbling away. So where did the first major challenge come from? It came from a systematic and, honestly, surprisingly effective pushback from the nation's courts. This is where those first visible cracks in the fortress really started to show. 23%. Now, on its own, a number like that might not seem like much, but when you see the context, it tells a story of a profound and, frankly, kind of historic level of legal failure for an administration. So here's that context. A huge study from the NYU Law Review found that, prior administrations typically won about 70% of their court cases against their agency actions. The Trump administration's win rate, it dropped to just 23%. I mean, that's not just a dip, that's a free fall. It suggests that time and time again, its policies were just being found legally unsound. And this wasn't just a few bad days in court. It was a clear pattern. You had the Supreme Court striking down global tariffs, lower courts blocking policies on everything from foreign students to trade. Even personal legal fights were getting dismissed. The real insight here? The judicial branch was acting as a serious, formidable check on executive power. And this quote from Chief Justice John Roberts just gets right to the heart of it. The administration wanted to create a new world, but it kept slamming into the old, established legal limits of the same Constitution. Okay, so let's move to the international stage, where you can see those cracks getting even wider. While the legal walls were failing at home, that fortress was also being breached from the outside. The promises of making these bold deals, they met a global reality that was, well, very resistant. Let's just take the military offensive against Iran as an example. One strategist, Brahma Chellaney, called it a strategic failure on all fronts. And you can see why. The goal of regime change, it failed. America became more isolated. Its credibility took a hit. The result, in Chellaney's words, was little to show but wreckage. Just wreckage. And this wasn't just about Iran. Not at all. Our sources point to a worldwide pattern of pushback. Trying to broker peace with Russia? Stalled. China's economy? It held up against tariffs, leading to a stalemate. Even allies like India started to publicly contradict what the administration was saying. The big takeaway here is that on the world stage, the US was losing its power to just call the shots. And things are getting rocky when even your high-profile supporters start heading for the exits. The departure of someone like Elon Musk, who really gave the administration this air of innovation, was symbolically a huge deal. His criticism of a key spending bill just highlighted this growing rift with people who had once been on board. So while all of this is happening with the courts and foreign policy, the economic foundation back home, the thing most voters really care about, was starting to show its own deep and pretty troubling cracks. This next number says so much about the economic story at home. 31%. A CNN poll found this was President Trump's approval rating on the economy. That's a record low, and it reflects this incredibly widespread frustration among the public. And if you dig into that polling data, the picture gets even sharper. A whopping 65% of Americans believed the administration's policies had actually made the economy worse. And as you can see, overall approval on the economy was stuck at that 31% mark, but for handling inflation, it was even lower, just 27%. This wasn't just a soft spot. This was the economic foundation of that fortress really starting to crumble. But numbers are one thing. This quote, which was captured at a Trump rally, brings it all down to a very human level. Even a supporter who was brought on stage to praise the president couldn't help but talk about how much he was struggling with the cost of living. It just shows this huge disconnect between the political message and what people were actually feeling every day. And the administration's response to these struggles, well, it often just seemed to make that disconnect even deeper. Giving advice on how families could handle rising prices, by giving up pencils and dolls, was seen by a lot of people as completely out of touch. And that creates a massive political problem. And to add to this whole economic story, the president's own publicly traded company, TMTG, saw its stock value just collapse. That's a really tough look, right? An administration promising prosperity for the nation while its own namesake company is losing millions. So you've got legal challenges, foreign policy headaches, and economic troubles piling up. How did all of that start to impact the one thing that matters most, Trump's political capital and that powerful connection he has with the public? A key symbol of political strength has always been that giant MAGA rally, but reports started describing a very different scene. A much-hyped return to the campaign trail wasn't in a stadium. It was in a small casino ballroom, and it wasn't even full. The optics alone suggested that maybe, just maybe, some of that MAGA magic was starting to fade. And this poll really shows the political damage in stark terms. When people were asked who was most to blame for rising food costs, a 55% majority pointed their finger directly at the Trump administration. That is more than double the 25% who blamed the previous Biden administration. Is proof that economic pain was turning directly into political blame. And this erosion of support has very real consequences. According to data analysis from Ipsos, the outlook for the midterms was looking pretty bleak for Republicans. Every single major projection model they looked at, and these all use different data, they all came to the same conclusion: a likely Democratic win in 2026. Okay, so after looking at the legal system, the world stage, the economy, and the polls, what's the big takeaway from all of this? You know, the key thing to pull from all these sources is that the collapse they're describing isn't some sudden, dramatic event. It's more like a slow, quiet erosion of power. It's what happens when loud promises of disruption are met with the steady, grinding reality of institutions, economic forces, and global players that have all figured out how to push back. And that leaves us with this one final, really thought-provoking question that runs through all the material we looked at today. When a leader promises disruption, what happens when the world, the courts, and the economy decide to disrupt back? It's a huge question about the fundamental limits of power, and it's one that really continues to define this turbulent political era.